Hey YouTube, Twig here, bringing you all my Amorphage Yugioh deck profile for September 2020. Big thanks to my buddy Nick for letting me borrow his Amorphage deck. For those of you that don't know, this is a deck that definitely does go under the wire most of the time, but it is a Pendulum deck that was released during Shining Victories, which main focus is to limit the plays your opponent can do depending on the type of Amorphage monsters you have Pendulum summon out onto the field or in the respectable Pendulum zones as well, having different ways to lock down your opponent from specific plays. It's a really interesting deck focusing on the Pendulum summoning. It did get kind of limited with the latest master rules we've had with the effects on Pendulum summoning, but still a very fun deck to play with all the different support we have available to it. I wanted to stick to a pure version of the deck. I always think these are the more fun versions to rely on the own cards that you have from them. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the Amorphage monsters, probably one of the best ones we run in the deck is Amorphage Sloth. All of them share a pretty similar style to Pendulum effects and monster effects. With Amorphage Sloth, its Pendulum effect, while you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them. And once per turn, during your standby phase, tribute one monster or destroy this card. So the tribute basically means you'll be tributing those Amorphage monsters come your turn, and then you'll be able to Pendulum summon them back onto the field to reuse. So Amorphage Sloth being able to limit, adding cards to your hand from the deck can really shut down a lot of different decks currently. This is a very important card for the Pendulum scales, and its effect on the field is neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck except for Amorphage monsters, and this is shared with a good amount of other Amorphage monsters that we run, or even just different effects based on if they are Pendulum summoned or not onto the field. But I like to run the 3 Sloth most of the time because the Pendulum scales are 3 to 5. To get this card out, you have to tribute summon for it, but still then those cards that you tribute will go to the extra deck, which you can easily recycle back with some of the other cards we run in the deck. I also run 3 Amorphage Lechery, with this one being a scale 5. While you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can activate spell cards or their effects, except for Amorphage cards. And once per turn during your standby phase, tribute one monster or destroy this card. So having the same tribute cost, but being able to shut down spells makes another 3 of for sure in the deck for that lockdown capability. And if this card is Pendulum Summon or flip face up, neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck while this card is face up on the field, except for Amorphage monsters. So being a level 2 monster, you're probably not going to Pendulum summon it as much as you would in this deck with the scales being 3 and 5, but being able to flip it face up, still a great way just to lock down your opponent for more protection plays. But most of the time I like to use Amorphage Lechery for its Pendulum scale compared to its actual monster effect, being that you can put Sloth and Lechery in the scales for a deck search and a spell negation lockdown for that play. Makes it your best go-to scales for the setup for sure. That's why I want to run 3 of both of these copies in the deck. For some of the other level 4 monsters, which are more of the common levels we have in the deck, so more of the focus ones for the special summons, I run 3 Amorphage Pride. While you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can take any effect damage, and once per turn, during your standby phase, tribute one monster or destroy this card. So more situational, but still very useful, especially depending on the type of deck you're going up against with this card. Not being able to take, effect damage for this card is a great way to protect yourself against your opponent's plays, and if this card is Pendulum Summon or flip face up, neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck while this card is face up on the field. So this is an effect that's shared with a lot of different Amorphages we run the deck, while Amorphage Sloth just has that guaranteed no special summon while it is out on the field. Pride has to be Pendulum summoned, so you have that option, but still very easy to do so because it is a level 4 monster, and the scales we run in the deck are 3 and 5, making it the only level you can Pendulum summon in this version of the deck. But like I said, I preferred to have Lechery and Sloth be saved for the Pendulum scale setup and let the level 4 monsters be the easier ones you can Pendulum summon out. I also run 3 Amorphage Wrath, being another level 4 monster. While you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can tribute monsters except for Amorphage monsters, and once per turn during your standby phase, tribute one monster or destroy this card. So this one, especially when you're going up against some of these stronger decks for sure, for that tribute of monsters, I mean, you're not really limited because the only thing you'll be tribute summoning out in this deck are Amorphage monsters, so another great add for the deck for that play. And going off of the tribute, you should have plenty of other Amorphages that you can Pendulum Summon out to protect, and also just go off of those effects depending on what you want to play against your opponent. And if this card's Pendulum Summon, flip face up, neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck, sharing the same effect, just like Amorphage Pride with the level 4 lineup. I also run 3 Amorphage Envy. With this one, while you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can activate card or effects as Chain Link 2 or higher. And once per turn during your standby phase, tribute 1 monster, destroy this card. So the Chain Link 2 or higher is definitely interesting. If you wanted to mix around some of these numbers with the last 3, then that can be player preference at that point. But Envy, with the Chain Link 2 or higher, it pops up sometimes just, when you're going back and forth between your opponent for those shutdowns. And there's not really too many high Chain Links you need to do with this deck to resolve any of the effects. And Envy also shares the same lockdown, Pendulum Summon, or flip face up special summon restriction as all the other Amorphage level 4s. For some of the lower numbers that I run for the Amorphage monsters, like I said with these last 2 options, you can mix around the numbers, but I run 2 Amorphage Greed. While you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can activate trap cards or effects except for Amorphage cards, and once per turn during your standby phase, tribute 1 monster or destroy this card. So the only reason I decided to run 2 Greed is because the trap card situation is, like I just said, more of a situational type of card. So if you wanted to drop an Envy for a 3rd Greed, if you're going to be going up against more trap-based decks, you can do that, but once again, player preference at that point. And I also run 2 Amorphage Gluttony, aside the fact that it is a level 2 monster as well. While you control an Amorphage monster, monsters cannot activate their effects except for Amorphage monsters. This is another preferred pendulum scale card, but it can also be a potential 3rd spot as well if you want to take out a Envy for one of these positions, or even if you want to drop the number of greeds for a 3rd Gluttony. It's just like I said with the other, Lechery being a level 2, but a better pendulum effect for sure for its scale. Not much better for the monster effect lockdown, seeing more and more cards for those plays. But that being the case, once again, you can either take out Greed or Envy for a 3rd spot of Gluttony. These last 3 spots were all just player preference depending on what you're going up against. And lastly, for the monsters, I run 1 Amorphage Goliath. While you control an Amorphage monster, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead, except for Amorphage cards. And once per turn during your standby phase, tribute 1 monster, destroy this card. Now, I only run 1 of this card because it is a more difficult monster to summon out, being a level 8 monster, but neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck except for Amorphage monsters, having that easy special summon restriction, just like Amorphage Sloth, but Sloth only requires 1 of the tributes to summon out, while Goliath needs the 2, and most of the time, if I do open up this card, it's going to go into the pendulum scale to stop my opponent's graveyard plays. But once again, situational again, depending on the type of deck you're going up against. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. I run 3 Amorphage Infection. All Amorphage monsters on the field gain 100 attack and defense for each Amorphage card on the field. If a monster in your hand or you control is tributed or destroyed by battle or card effect, you can add 1 Amorphage card from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Amorphage Infection once per turn. So this is a great search power, being a continuous spell on the field to continuously add the different Amorphage cards, which if you really see on this art of the card, you can see where the Amorphage cards are searched from. They're transformed from different animals, and the infection spreads that way. So definitely a creepy card for sure, but definitely needed for the search power in the deck overall. As for the field spell, I am running 2 of the Amorphous Persona. This is all Amorphage monsters in the field gain 300 attack and defense, and up to twice per turn. If an Amorphage monster you control is tributed, draw 1 card, and you can banish this card from your graveyard to tribute pendulum summon monsters from your hand or field whose total levels equal exactly that. Then ritual summon 1 Amorphactor Pain, Imagination of the Dracover Lord from your hand. So I don't run the ritual monster in this version of the deck, but it's just a better setup card for the attack boost and the draw power with all the different tributing you can do with your Amorphage monsters. So that's just more consistency, because you can definitely invest a lot for the pendulum summons, and if they fail, you want basically to have something to come back on with your Amorphous Persona. And I also run the 1 Terraforming. When I run 2 of this card, it doesn't really give you any search power. It has the draw power when you have the setup, but just being able to have that search power with Terraforming makes it all the easier, so you can draw into more relevant cards and not see multiples of the field spell or anything else also. And since we have plenty of level 4 monsters, I'm also running 3 Ties of the Brethren. With this one, it's just an easy special summon. You don't use life points really for anything else in this deck, and having plenty of different level 4 Amorphage monsters to special summon out with this card, it just gives you more and more resources, which then you can build up in the extra deck and search out with our next card that I'll go over in just a second. So a great special summon option for sure, because then you'll have all those resources on the field to rely on. Even if you don't want to use them for their lockdown effects, you can use them next turn for extra deck summons also. And I also run 2 Pendulum Paradox. You add 2 face-up Pendulum monsters with the same Pendulum scale, but different names from your extra deck to your hand. You can only activate 1 Pendulum Paradox per turn. Now, I even considered bumping this card up to 3. And if I were to, I would probably take out one of my trap card lineup spots. But this card is amazing because of the fact that we have so many different named Amorphage monsters, but, you know, very, very similar Pendulum scales as well. 3 and 5, so you have definitely plenty of options once you build up that extra deck with cards, let's say, like Ties of the Brethren, to then add them back to your hand for you to use with Pendulum Paradox. So I'd like to run 2 of this card, just giving you more cards to run and add back into your hand, since you will also be limited with some of those cards in the extra deck, since if you don't have your link arrow set up, you won't be able to Pendulum summon out as many as you normally would want to with this deck. And that is it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. I run 3 Amorphage Lysis. It's a continuous trap. All monsters on the field except for Amorphage monsters lose 100 attack and defense for each Amorphage card on the field. And if a card in your Pendulum Zone is destroyed except during the damage step, you can place 1 Amorphage Pendulum monster from your deck in your Pendulum Zone. You can only use this effect of Amorphage Lysis once per turn. So depending on which one you have set up, it's just that easier to get some of the lower numbers of monsters we're running in the deck onto the field to use using your Amorphage Lysis, and then being able to have the different setup depending on the cards you're going up against with your opponent. This card is very vital for that setup, and being searchable with some of the other cards, being an Amorphage card, it won't be affected by any of the restrictions we have in the deck also. And I also run 3 Pendulum Reborn. This card just definitely comes in handy for the fact that you special summon 1 face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck or 1 Pendulum monster from your graveyard. So if you have to tribute one of yours, you can easily just have your Pendulum Reborn set up on the field. And once that card's gone, if your extra deck zone is empty, you can activate your Pendulum Reborn, special summoning back another Amorphage onto the field for you to use. And with some of the higher level Amorphage monsters that we're running, if you don't have the Pendulum scales set up for it, these might just be the easier way to summon those cards out into the field to make use of using Pendulum Reborn. And lastly, I run the 3 Rivalry of Warlords. With this one, each player can only control 1 type of monster. So with that, you're definitely powered up, since all of the Amorphages are dragons. So you won't be limited to any of those plays, but you'll definitely limit your opponent, since none of the Amorphages really limited the type of monster you can run. So Rivalry of Warlords is definitely handy for that, since you'll be restricting your opponent with all the other different plays in the deck with this card. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. For the extra deck, when you're not, limited from special summoning from it, I wanted some good options based on the Pendulum monsters we're running and just the overall attribute of the Amorphage monsters. So I run 1 Asa the Earth Charmer. All of the Amorphages are Earth, so just a good way to rely on this card. For its play is the same with Mrs. Radiant being a Earth monster. It gives another additional boost along with all of the other Amorphage cards that boost up power or even just lower power for your opponent, and then being able to add back cards from the graveyard for you to re-pendulum summon out on the field makes it all the better as well, because we do run some Exceed monsters, so when you use them for Exceed material, they will go to the graveyard. But Mrs. Radiant is definitely handy also for the link arrows, being able to pendulum summon out more from the extra deck when you get this card out on the field. I also run 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Cross Sheep, just once again link arrows, and then depending on the type of card you summon out, makes it all the better. Most of the time it'll only be the Exceed monster, but still very useful for sure. Also 1 Nightmare Unicorn, 1 Zephyr Metaltron. This is definitely an interesting one, being a more powerhouse link 3 to protect our special summon extra deck monsters, and 1 Borreload Dragon. This could be Boral Sword or even Access Code Talker, just a player preference at this point when building the deck. And for the Exceed monsters, I run 1 Magister Paladin, the Ascending Draco Slayer. Another great search card for this setup you can do, just needing 2 level 4 Pendulum monsters very accessible with this deck as well. 1 Castel, the Sky Blaster, 1 number 41 Baguska, 1 Tornado Dragon, 1 Daigusto Morale, 1 Silent Honor Arc, and 1 Gagaga Cowboy to finish off the Exceed monsters. If you want to add in a Abyss Dweller, you can take out any of these options for a spot to add that card in, but once again, I was just trying to figure out more spots, and with some of the other Amorphage monsters taking care of the graveyard, I didn't really see it needed as some of the other options in the deck. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. As for actual playstyle in the deck, as long as you have that pendulum set up and know what your opponent's going up against with the cards on the field, depending on the scales you have, as long as you know what to pendulum summon out, or at least lock down your opponent, that is basically what you'll rely on with this deck, having that field set up, so your opponent cannot do any plays, and then just take advantage of that with your own monsters attacking over their monsters. And until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And as always, taking, advice or just other recommendations for deck profiles. But until then, Kira Twig out.